I got this great question from my friend Maddie this last week, and she asked, how much of your time do you spend executing versus being in meetings, conferences, etc.? She said, I'm used to being an executor, and now my job seems to be meeting with people and managing. And it's a really good question. If you guys have ever managed a team or grown a startup, it's a problem you'll probably run into. And I'd say the answer depends on how big your company is. Once you get to about 7 or so direct reports, your job starts to become more about managing people than it becomes about actually executing stuff, at least in the way that you're typically used to. Management starts to become your full-time job. And depending on your management style, that can mean a lot of meetings and it can mean a lot of communication. So that can take up a lot more of your time. I personally spend most of my time in meetings, and I still end up doing a lot of operational stuff in between, right? I'm still executing. It just requires that I find a way to set aside time to be able to do that. You guys may be familiar with a post by Paul Graham called Maker versus Manager's Schedule. And he talks about the difference in mindsets between being in a maker's mindset versus a manager's mindset. And it's hard to do both at the same time. It's a lot like the analogy of as a writer versus as an editor. It's hard to both write and edit your work at the same time. And you want to compartmentalize and write and then edit separately because the two together doesn't usually work out. It's hard to be both, left brain and right brain at the same moment. So that's the idea of Paul Graham's post, is that basically when you want to make, you have to set aside a large block of time, and you can't do the management stuff in between. It's impossible for you to set aside an hour for a meeting with someone that reports to you, and then an hour for making, and then another hour for a meeting. No, you have to do like a 6-hour chunk of managing, a 6-hour chunk of making, and you have to set aside the time for creativity. I think that is really important. It's really clear. You have to be really clear about which meetings you are taking and aren't taking. So you actually have the time to make. For example, for myself, I still do a lot of the operational stuff at 1 month. I still make videos for you guys. I still make classes, and I still do some of the marketing. But I also meet with everybody at the company at least once a week. And we talk about setting goals that contribute to the organizational long-term objectives. And I check in and I coach people on how to help problem solve. I identify problems, and I ask a lot of questions. And that's my management style, or at least that's the style I'm exploring. I get a lot of my idea of what it is to be a manager and a lot of these frameworks from books that I read. A really good one I'd recommend is called High Output Management by Andy Grove. I'm actually reading another one of his books right now called Only the Paranoid Survive. But if you are a first-time manager, I would highly recommend reading High Output Management. It's one of the best management books that I've seen. So that being said, when you have to do both execution and management stuff, a lot of times the execution stuff kind of gets pushed to the side. And so, in my case, it's one of the reasons it's a struggle running a startup is you often have to do both because you don't have enough people executing. And everyone needs to kind of split responsibility. So that stuff ends up sometimes getting pushed to the evenings, to the weekends, or early in the mornings when people aren't really around. That being said, I think that there's a really important thing that you have to start realizing once you become a manager, and that's the way that you spend your time is going to flip. Whereas before you spent your time, maybe 10% of the time was doing overhead like operational stuff, writing emails, talking to people, and 90% of your time was spent doing things, it might flip the opposite. You might spend 10% of your time, actually executing and doing stuff, and 90% of the time feels like it's spent meeting with people, sending out emails, and doing all this other manager kind of stuff. And you have to rethink it. The secret is to make that other stuff feel like it's execution, because in a sense, it is. You will see if you're at a team that gets large enough without someone handling the management stuff, that the team kind of breaks apart. there's no communication, there's no clarity around what are the goals for the organization, how do we measure success against those goals, you'll end up running into a lot of problem, and someone has to be doing it. So the trick is to start to realize that within your organization, if that's the role that you're in, that stuff is work, and you want to constantly be improving it as well. So I don't think that you should assume that you can be a good manager just by trying really hard, or that your natural instincts are the right thing to do. Ben Horowitz, in The Hard Thing About Hard Things, says that being a good manager is kind of like learning how to box. You have to overcome your initial instincts. Your instincts are going to tell you to do something, and they'll be totally wrong. Like, your instinct when you are first boxing is to take a step back when you're going away from the opponent by lifting up your front foot. That's how we usually take steps back. But in boxing, if you do that, you're going to get knocked on your ass, because it's not a good way to take a step back. As soon as you lift your back foot, you're totally off balance and you're out. So instead, you have to teach yourself to take a step back with your back foot first and then slide your front foot back. Now, that's a really specific example, but there's a lot of examples in life where the natural thing that you're going to want to end up doing is not exactly the best thing, and management really is one of those examples. So, writing that email or meeting with people may not seem like the most valuable thing you could be doing, and sometimes you just want to execute, but you have to recognize that as a manager and as someone who's running a team, your job is to help other people be as productive as possible and to maximize the output of the entire team, that it's no longer about you as an individual. So that's it for today's Founder Friday. And if you have any other related questions or any other ideas that this brought to you, just shoot me an email at founderfriday@onemonth.com. Thank you, guys. Talk to you next week.